Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We are an open dialogue on education, the arts, and social change. My name is John Braden. I'm a professor and a writer, and an educator who really is now educating outside the classroom. That's the way we like to see our show. So we like to feature people who we can really raise the bar of knowledge that's being put out there above even mainstream media, hopefully way above mainstream media, with substantive intellectuals, thinkers, activists, people like Alice Slater, whose home we're in now, whose beautiful Yorkville apartment, that's in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Claudia and I took the Q train from Times Square, our first time on the old 2nd Avenue line that's been revived, so this is an historic day for us. And we're just enjoying a wonderful afternoon with Alice here in her lovely apartment. But there's a very serious side to our visit here, because we have a nuclear crisis going on in the world. It's actually been going on since 1945, and very often, or actually very seldom, do they ever say, well, why don't we just get rid of all these darn weapons? Why do we need them? And now we have a president of the United States, Mr. Donald J. Trump, who many people are questioning whether he has the right temperament to be in charge of the nuclear codes. So with this backdrop of a crisis, we feature a woman who has spent many years as an activist, as an empowered woman. This is Women's Month. We had the big Women's March. She's got her red on now, which is with pink flowers, and 1917 was the Communist Revolution 100 years ago. Let's give a little nod to Karl Marx, in a good way, not the good part of Marxism. But there was a lot of critical intellectuals here in New York and also in Hungary. Alice is part Hungarian, so she brings a kind of intellectual tradition. I've always been enchanted by Alice, by her ability to speak and to present herself in the world through dialogue, through conversations. We first met actually through a mutual friend, Rick Ulfick, who has a wonderful organization called We the World, which is advocating for world peace. I think we had seen a movie at the Film Forum together, and we all went over to the Gray Dog, which was on, I think at the time it was on Clarkson Street or somewhere there, Cornelia Street, one of those cute little village streets. And I just, boy, Alice is someone we'd love to get on our show. We're so glad. This is her second appearance on our show. You can Google the previous appearance. And now, let me shut up and bring you our guest of honor, because, we're almost out of time. No, I'm only kidding. We're going to just have a nourishing hour with Alice Slater. We're not like a typical news show. We're not a typical talk show. I'm not a pundit, ladies and gentlemen. I'm allergic to punditry. I get tired of punditry. After a while, blah, 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 blah. But we cover the big issues here, but we do it in a different way and in a more dialogical way. And we're going to get to also Alice's biography and who she is and how she became the thinker and activist she is. But let's start with the crisis, the nuclear crisis. What is the latest on that, Alice?
Well, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned the 1917 revolution, because I think the big crisis today is how we are creating a new McCarthy era, where we're blaming Russia for our ills. And the strange thing about Donald Trump, who's like terrifying to all of us, is that the only good thing he did when he was running is saying he wanted to make a deal with Putin, and he's getting killed for it. The CIA is leaking stuff, and the FBI, and we have this veteran intelligence agents for sanity who say that this is a total red herring, that there's no way that Russia hacked our election. Be that as it may, it's become like poison to even talk about it. So I want to give a boost to Russia. Because it's very interesting to me that I've been doing some studying about this. When they had the Russian Revolution, Woodrow Wilson sent 30,000 American troops to Moscow to help the Tsar. So we have this capitalist plot, all these years. I mean, they were so terrified of the communist philosophy. Frankly, we've never really had communism. I mean, I don't think we've had democracy here either. I mean, we had slavery. The women couldn't have the vote. We slaughtered all the Native Americans. We haven't faced up to us, to what is democracy? Have we really had it? Have we done what we said we were going to do? Just like the communists never had communism. They had a brutal dictator and speech was forbidden, free speech. But they did get economic equality, which we don't have. I mean, so, there was a trade-off. And it's very interesting. I just read Blanche Wiesen-Cook is a fabulous historian at John Jay College, wrote 3 volumes on Eleanor Roosevelt's biography. And the 3rd one is out now. And I've read all of them. But we were fighting the same fight that Trump is fighting now. It was the corporate class that Obama and Hillary and Clinton gave in to much too much, that created this terrible environment that allowed Trump to rise. I mean, if Bernie would have won the election, we'd be in a totally different state. If Hillary would have won, she was going to bomb Syria. She's the one that pivoted to China. And right now we're putting missiles in South Korea. And Trump is hurrying it up because South Korea's had the overthrow of their right-wing government, and their liberal government doesn't want our missile base there. They want to negotiate. This supposed lunatic in North Korea, he's rattling his nuclear sabers. He's not stupid. Saddam Hussein got rid of his nuclear weapons. He wound up in a sewer pipe. Gaddafi got rid of his nuclear weapons. He wound up in a hole in the ground. So this guy's getting the weapons, and he is begging us to negotiate. We still have 38,000 U.S. troops on the Korean border. We have not had a peace treaty since 1953 when the Korean War ended, and we've been sanctioning the country. So we've been trying to starve it all these years like we did with... So I'm not saying he's the good guy, but here's something really interesting that we have never seen in the mainstream media. There's been a tremendous campaign by the non-nuclear weapon states to get a treaty to ban the bomb. We have treaties to ban chemical weapons, to ban biological weapons, but the non-proliferation treaty that addresses nuclear weapons allowed the 5 original states that had the weapons, the U.S., Russia, England, France, and China, to say they're going to make good faith efforts to eliminate their weapons. And everybody in the world signed it, promising never to get the weapons except 3 countries, Israel, Pakistan, and India. So they got their weapons. Then there's North Korea was a member, but this dopey non-proliferation treaty gives every country, to sweeten the pot, who promises not to get the bomb, a, quote, inalienable right to peaceful nuclear power. And every nuclear reactor is a bomb factory. That's how. So North Korea got their peaceful reactor, and then they walked out of the treaty and made a bomb. That's what Iran was starting to do when we negotiated with them to stop. But many countries in our alliance have enriched plutonium, like Japan. Every couple of years, their generals say, let's make a bomb. I mean, they have nuclear power, so they've got the material. In any event, this new fabulous campaign, which is called the Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear War, we've had 3 meetings in Oslo, Mexico, and Austria, and now they have agreed to negotiate a treaty to eliminate nuclear weapons. And this March, they're meeting for 1 week, and in July and June for 2 weeks. And they already had a planning meeting for 1 day, and there's 120 countries. Now, this is interesting. The 5 nuclear weapon states, the Western states and Russia, U.S., Russia, England, and France are boycotting the meeting, and they voted against it.
Oh, my God.
The Asian states, China, India, and Pakistan, have abstained. And North Korea voted yes to ban the bomb. Did you see that on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post? I mean, they really want our attention. And interesting, we have this whole group of countries which we're calling the Weasel States, which is the NATO alliance they're all under the nuclear umbrella, and we keep U.S. nukes in Germany, Italy, Belgium, Turkey, and one other country, Holland. And we have the 3 Asian countries, South Korea and Japan and Australia, that are in the nuclear umbrella, and they're not supporting this. Japan, that walks around all the time talking about how awful the bomb was, which it was.
Yes.
They're so hypocritical because they want to keep the U.S. nuclear arsenal as part of what they call their umbrella. Now, as far as the terrifying hands of Donald Trump, I agree. But they're not safe in anybody's hands.
Right.
And I don't think anybody's going to literally, even Trump or Russia or the U.S. is going to make a decision to bomb another country, because we all know they have so many to come back at us. Particularly, there are 16,000 nuclear weapons on the planet, and 15,000 are in the U.S. and Russia. So of all the 9 nuclear weapon states, the other 7 have 1,000 altogether, like a couple hundred or whatever. And the U.S. and Russia are sitting there with these huge arsenals with missiles targeted at all our major cities. And it's not that somebody's going to say, let's bomb Moscow, or it's that there could be an accident. There's been so many close calls. God is really looking out for us. It's amazing. There's a movie, The Man Who Saved the World, about Soviet Colonel Petrov that was in the Russian missile silo, and the computers looked like we were attacking them, and their orders were hit back, New York, Washington, Boston, and he disobeyed orders. He said, I don't think this is real, and he was right. It was a computer malfunction, and they were really mad at him that he didn't follow, like he was disobeying. But anyway, we've had it the same thing at our end. There were like 31 airplanes that crashed carrying nuclear weapons since the 50s, and none of them ever went off. A couple of them spewed some plutonium in Thule, Greenland, and Palomar, Spain, but they never went off. I mean, there's still one they haven't found that's off the coast of Georgia. So maybe they'll get the Attorney General that way, the former Ku Klux Klan guy that's now in charge of our laws. Anyway, so this is, but what we have to understand about Russia is that they have always wanted to make peace on this. Stalin asked Truman to turn the bomb over to the United Nations when we bombed Japan. He was our ally. We turned him down, so of course they got their bomb. They're not going to be left behind. Then, after the wall came down, Gorbachev and Reagan met and said, let's get rid of all our nuclear weapons. Reagan said, great idea. Gorbachev, let's do that. Let's make this part of this. He let go of all of Eastern Europe without a shot. It was like a miracle. All those countries that the Soviet Union had occupied. So anyway, Gorbachev said, let's do it, but don't you do Star Wars, because our Star Wars mission says controlling and dominating the military use of space. That's in the mission statement. Reagan said nothing doing, so Gorbachev pulled the offer off the table. Putin offered Clinton to cut our 15,000 back to 1,000 each and call everybody to the table to negotiate. But don't put missiles in Romania and Poland. And Clinton said, I'm not making that promise.
Terrible.
And then Putin backed off.
Terrible.
And then, not only did we do that, Reagan promised Gorbachev that if they didn't object to a unified Germany becoming part of NATO, and you got to remember that Russia lost 27 million people, 27 million to the Nazi onslaught. I mean, we lost 3,000 in the World Trade Center. We turned the whole world upside down. They're sitting with this history of 27 million slaughtered. I was there. I saw the mass graves in Leningrad. I mean, it was terrible. So anyway, we promised him, they were terrified of Germany, that if they didn't object to the new reunited Germany as part of NATO, we would not expand NATO. Well, guess what? It's up to the Russian border now. We took in every one of those Eastern Europe. We didn't follow a thing. And Clinton bombed Kosovo. That was the first time that any country bombed another country since the UN without the approval of the Security Council, because we have a treaty that says you cannot take any aggressive action unless you're in imminent threat of being attacked, which Kosovo was not going to attack the United States. So if people would understand this, we would see that there's an opening. And let me tell you something else. Russia and China proposed in 2008 a treaty to ban missiles. And it was in the Commission on Disarmament in Geneva, where you need consensus to negotiate. And the U.S. was the only country to block it. We wouldn't even talk about it. And they put it in again in 2015. And again, we blocked the missile ban. Not only that, we walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty that we had with the Soviet Union since 1972. Clinton started putting in the emplacements into Romania, and Bush actually walked out of it. And that was a treaty saying we weren't going to do that. So we're very untrustworthy in terms of keeping our word. And what you're seeing is the operation of the military-industrial complex. That's what went after Trump. In other words, Trump, I don't want to make him into a good guy, but he said, I want to make a deal with Russia. You know, they got hysterical. They started giving all this fake information. And who said, now, you know, anybody that talks to Russia is a traitor. Who says you can't talk to Russia? As a matter of fact, there was a very interesting article this week by two former Republican secretaries of state, Jack Matlock, and I forgot who the other one was, saying this is ridiculous. We always talk to foreign countries. Just say that. And for the Democrats to think that they're going to blame Hillary's loss on Russia interfering with our elections, that is so insane. So we're in trouble, guys. You know, we are. I mean, we're in trouble in the sense that the Democrats aren't coming through for us. We were going to have this National Committee chair, Ellison, who was a black Muslim congressman that was going to leave Congress and organize, and Bernie was supporting him, and Elizabeth Warren, and Obama and Hillary stepped in a month before the election, put their guy forth, Perez, who was for the Pacific Trade Treaty, which is one of the reasons why Trump had so much support.
He was right about that, Trump.
Well, you know, I remember marching against Clinton, against NAFTA in Seattle. You know, that was the beginning of the end. We were sending all these jobs overseas and letting them hire slave labor, and our guys were going out of work. You know, during World War II, we used to have stuff, I'm old enough to remember, Buy America, you know. Since when does it just have to be the cheapest thing? Why wouldn't you want to buy something that's union-made and pay a little more and share the wealth a little bit? There's been too much greed.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Alice. This is an amazing discourse, and this is something that I would hope that one day you'd be able to say this on the Rachel Maddow show and the Lawrence O'Donnell show and the Chris Hayes show. You're shaking your head no, but I want to be hopeful. We had a guest on our show yesterday, Frances Fox Piven, who also says very radical things politically and has been marginalized for many, many years, but a couple weeks ago she popped up on Lawrence O'Donnell. So because that's economics.
But not the war machine, because the war machine owns the networks, and they got rid of, who's that great, Phil Donahue, remember?
Yes.
He had a great talk show, and it was in the build-up to the Iraq War. He had the highest ratings on MSNBC, and he was having all our peace people on and interviewing why we should not go to war in Iraq, and they fired him.
Well, in the first article about our show, about our talk show here, I was compared to Phil Donahue, and that's a badge of honor. I love Phil. I love him.
He was great.
You know, I want to try to really be hopeful now, because you've really inspired me by what you just said. Number one, to realize that there are things about Trump. He's not the boogeyman. I mean, there are aspects there. We have to be logical and rational. I know you're laughing now, but, you know, he's anti-TPP, so am I. I don't want to see a Cold War with Russia, which Hillary may have pushed us in that direction, you know. And what I would like to do with this show, and I'm looking at my darling wife, Claudia, who's filming us now, and this show is very much a product of our love also. Paulo Freire, the great Brazilian philosopher, said we need to teach for a world in which it's easier to love. We talk about that a lot on our show. To really make our show an advocate of a nuclear-free world, and to get these discourses out there. Once this goes on YouTube, this can get a lot of hits, and we're using our show as a platform to educate others. That a lot of people don't know the things that you just said, Alice, that, you know, Reagan had a possibility of going to a zero option in Reykjavik. We could have did that. We could do it again. I didn't know that Bill Clinton walked away from a treaty that would have knocked us and Russia down to 1,000 each. That would have been a beginning towards zero. We need to go to zero. Let me look in the camera now. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot trust nuclear weapons with anybody. It's ridiculous that we've had them so long. You know who said this too? A guy named Tad Daly, who wrote a book called Apocalypse Never. He gave a lecture a couple years ago in New York, which I went to. He said, it's amazing that we're even here now. We've come so close. Einstein, what did Einstein say?
He said that everything after the bomb has changed except our way of thinking, and thus we're heading towards unpredictable catastrophe, you know, if we don't change our way of thinking, because the smashing of the atom changed everything. Anyway, it's not just nuclear bombs, it's nuclear power. It's just as much involved in this. I mean, we can't keep giving people the keys to the bomb factory and expect to stop nuclear proliferation. So, and it's, you know, right here in New York State, for your visitors, for your viewers, Mario Cuomo has been sort of helpful in helping us shut down this Indian Point, Fukushima on the Hudson. But the trade-off he's making is to give $7.6 billion in subsidies to 4 upstate nuclear power plants. This is lunacy. You know, for $7.6 billion, you could put a solar roof on every house in New York State. You could have like millions of green jobs for all the... He's trying to help the economy upstate, he says. I mean, well, build a windmill factory or a solar panel factory for $7.6 billion, you know. And the other thing is, in New York, I mean, this is... I know it sounds like it's not nuclear, but it's all the same. We have no offshore wind in the United States of America. We just opened up one little port in Rhode Island like this couple of months ago, and there's some talk now about doing it off Long Island. But Long Island is like the Saudi Arabia of wind. And I don't know if everybody remembers, people in Cape Cod were so upset they didn't want to have their view spoiled.
Yes.
Well, in New York, we don't have to do that because we have a shallow seabed that goes out over the horizon, and you can have your beautiful view and have enough wind to power the whole eastern seaboard.
My goodness.
And what's holding it up? It's these corporate interests. They're blocking progress. You know, and Cuomo talking about $7.5 billion to subsidize nuclear when we need all this. It's crazy. So
get your pink hats on, folks. We're going to hit the streets. You know, I also want to say about myself that I'm a refugee from academia, that they won't let me teach anymore. In the colleges I've taught, I'm still hopeful that there are colleges out there that are decent and who have knowledge about pedagogy who will let me come in and teach. But I'm not going to name names, but there are colleges now who I teach in a very radical democratic way, and I bring up these issues in my class. We discuss the nuclear threat, we discuss poverty, we discuss inequality of wealth, and that's how I help my students learn how to write and find their voices and think critically by connecting democracy to education. But these colleges where I teach, Alice, they don't care about that. They want want to teach the tests. They want to create people that are very passive and amenable to taking orders for the corporatocracy.
Because that's who's funding them. What we did with Bernie was a miracle.
Yes.
Because he raised more money than Hillary, and he didn't take one corporate gift.
Good.
And it came from the people, little contributions. He said the average one was $27. I know I send $10 at a time, And just that, the ACLU this last month, with what's been going on with the refugees, the immigrants. My granddaughter went to the airport. I was so proud of her. But hundreds of thousands of people showed up at the airport. And in New York, I think it was like 8,000 lawyers went to the airport to help people. I mean, it's like so...
And Jerry Nadler was there. I want to give a shout-out to Jerry. Jerry Nadler was there.
He's wonderful.
Yes.
But the ACLU raised usually they put out a call, usually raise, maybe $1 million or $2 million. They raised, like tens of millions of dollars that people were interested in helping them. And I went last night. They did the zip code thing all over the country, and they wound up, I think, with 5,000 meetings in your zip code, so people could get together and say what we were going to do. And one of the things they recommended, which was really interesting, is to go to our local police precinct and tell them, like here in New York, de Blasio called us a sanctuary city, which means the police are not supposed to cooperate with the immigration authorities, which Trump is hiring an extra 10,000 ICE. So we can't, I can't say anything good about Trump, even though I was glad that he was talking to right now. He's not, he's just so awful. That cabinet, our chief lawyer, the Attorney General of the United States, was a member of the Ku Klux Klan.
What? That's
Sessions.
Crazy. He really was.
Yeah, he was in the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh my God.
They didn't approve him for a judgeship. Congress, when Kennedy was running the Judiciary Committee, because of that. So, but anyway, we were at these meetings, and this is one of the things they suggested. So there's people all over. Just look, and there were like 40 people showed up at this meeting, and everybody's so eager to do something, to be effective, to stop the juggernaut, to save democracy.
Yes. We need to save democracy and our planet, and we're doing that right now with Alice Slater in her lovely apartment in Yorkville, New York, on the Upper East Side. And I want to just show the world who's watching our show where we are, and just to do a little pan around of this lovely apartment. Claudia, maybe you could just pan around. This is a very urban, cosmopolitan, intellectual, liberal, I want to say liberal, enclave here. And I'm going to hand you the microphone, Alice, as I open the shade, and we can look out the window and see. This is urban life, okay? This is the Upper East Side.
Well, I don't want to get too fancy. I'm in a rent-stabilized apartment, thank goodness. Yeah. I'm just lucky. Right over there, you can't see it. You could from my bedroom, but East River is over there.
East River, yeah.
And Gracie Mansion is up the block where the mayor lives.
Okay.
And I think I was telling you earlier that my grandmother came from Hungary, and this was the old Hungarian neighborhood. Yes. And my aunt said they used to play in Gracie Mansion. They called it the haunted house because it was falling down. And then LaGuardia, Mayor LaGuardia in the 30s fixed it up and made it into the...
Good for him.
And I was reading about that. He really didn't want it. It was too fancy for him. But the WPA, they were looking to jobs. It was like part of Roosevelt's job, so he couldn't turn it down because it was going to employ people to build a house.
Yeah, okay, I'm listening.
Anyway, that's the story.
That's fascinating stories. Good old LaGuardia, the little flower. The little flower. So I want to show this also look at this couch. I look at this couch and I say, this is where we have to film salons. I mean, this is the kind, we need to, if we can put our own media, Alice, we don't need to rely on MSNBC. Why should we wait for them to invite us when we could create the content right here? It goes on YouTube and the world gets educated.
I have to tell you about this apartment.
Yes.
I, in my pre-nuclear disarmament days, was working for the Hunger Project to end hunger on the planet. Not that I ever stopped.
Okay.
And I had a committee. We were doing fundraising for the Hunger Project in New York, and I was the chair, and we met every Wednesday, 8 a.m. I used to come in from Great Neck because I was suburban house, but, I was living there.
Right.
So when my daughter, well, this is such a wonderful story.
ahead.
My daughter, Helen Slater, was in 9th grade. My son, David, was going off to college. I'm living in Great Neck because it has good schools, and New York City schools were very poor at that time, although I'm a product of New York City schools.
Yeah.
And when I went to Queens College, it was $5 a semester, just in case.
Oh.
So anyway, Helen was in 9th grade, and they were doing The Sound of Music at Great Neck South Junior High, and I went to see her in a school play, see my kid, and just a beautiful child, and she's singing and dancing and shining, and I'm sobbing. And my mother is sitting there, Grandma, the critic, she goes, she's good. So I said, Helen, why don't you try out for performing arts and we can move to the city? That was it, like I was going to get her into free school.
Right.
So they took 70 kids out of 3,000.
Yeah.
I knew she was in. I took this apartment. It was rent stable. It was like minimal rent.
Oh, my goodness.
2 bedrooms, one for me, one for Helen. And this is a sleeping sofa when David came home. So I was doing the Hunger Project, and I'm moving to the city, and on my committee is Terry Goldsack, a designer who did all the model apartments in New York. And he said, not all, but a lot of it. And he said to me, Alice, you're moving in, I'll help you. What do you want? I said, I want a place where I can have a lot of meetings.
Oh, this is it. This is it.
This is it. He did the
If the
whole
walls
thing.
could talk, Alice, right?
No, but it was fabulous.
Yes.
Terry was wonderful. He died of AIDS. He was gay.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
But, the Hunger Project was a fabulous idea to make the end of hunger on the planet an idea whose time has come. In the 70s, when everybody said hunger was inevitable, starvation's inevitable, there's too many people, there's not enough food. Well, now we have the Millennium Development Goals to end hunger. I mean, it really got the idea out. And I'm now, my favorite thing that I'm doing now, I'm on the coordinating committee of World Beyond War. Which is to do the same thing, like make the end of war on the planet.
Wonderful.
I mean, it's not like just stop little wars. We've got to stop the whole thing. And the planet can't take it. I mean, we have to clean up our mess and address global warming. And you have more than half our budget going to the military. That's insane. Nobody's watching the store, It's like...
We need to put a period at the end of war. We need to do that. And I want to just pose the question dialogically now to you, to our audience. How do we do this? My parents live in Ocean Grove, New Jersey. And every year, Claudia and I go down and visit them there a couple times a year. And there's the great auditorium there, which is this big, beautiful, like a church auditorium that was built in like the 1890s, and they've had a lot of lectures there over the years. Woodrow Wilson gave a speech there. Lots of big time. Caruso spoke there. I think they said that it's for a small town, more major celebrities have gone through there than any other town in our country because of this great auditorium. And one of the speeches made there, the famous speeches, was in 1912 by Taft, William Howard Taft, and it was a speech calling on the abolition of warfare. This was in 1912. Now, had they listened to Taft, we wouldn't have had World War I.
The Hague Appeal for Peace, where we said we were going to outlaw war. That's what World Beyond War is doing.
Okay.
And the way to do this is to just get a lot of people talking about it. We have peace education. We have
peace education.
Once people know that how much we're spending, and this, you can't fight terrorism with an army. You've got to fight it with food and social reform and
Education.
And we have to help these countries, and the more we bomb them, the more they hate us, the more terrorists. It's like
a cycle.
I felt that way with 9/11. I just could not believe that we went to war in Afghanistan, because It was a criminal act. We should have
It
found
was
the guy
crime,
in his
yes.
cave,
Right.
arrest him,
Not
put
about
him on
population.
trial, which,
Right.
by the way, Obama didn't do. He threw him overboard. I mean, what kind of baloney is that for America?
Right.
Why didn't we bring him back and put him on trial? And, and have it like we did with the Nazi war crimes, Nuremberg trial. So there's like a great deal of lawlessness in America. And what I'm really encouraged about is every speech that Bernie gave, he acknowledged the indigenous people of America, right? And now that North Dakota pipeline, all the tribes got together. I mean, they were killing each other forever. The Navajos, the Cherokees, the Comanches, they got together, and then so many of us came to support them. So I think, right here in New York, where we're closing down the Indian Point nuclear power plant, 25 miles from New York, they are running a pipeline. Spectra company, less than half a mile from the hot fuel rods that are sitting. Yeah, that's their plan.
That's
like, I
crazy.
think we have to stop that. We're working
Yes.
with the local Lenape tribe.
Yes,
They
yes,
are
yes.
the original first people in New York.
Yes.
So, I mean, we have to stop this stuff.
Now, I want to give a shout out to one of our former guests, Mr. Jean-Louis Bourgeois. John Louis made the front page of the New York Post a couple months ago when he gave a house that he owns in the village worth about $5 million. He gave it to the Lenape Indian tribe. The beginning of a process to give Manhattan back to the Indians. Now that to me is amazing. And look at that, folks. It's happening. It's a beginning of a process. We have to look at this as a process over time, education. Even Dennis Kucinich said that we should have a Department of Peace at the cabinet level to be educating about peace.
You say even. Dennis is the only one.
Oh, he's the
and
only-
they redistricted him. I mean, I worked for his presidential campaign, but then they actually, they got him out of Congress. I mean, you could always go to Dennis for an anti-nuclear bill, for an anti-missile bill, and there's nobody there
Can we get him
now.
on this show, Alice? Can you have connections?
I could write to him. I
Okay.
don't know if he would do it, but
Okay.
I know how to get to him. You should interview David Swanson,
Okay.
who was his press secretary and who is the founder of World Beyond War. He's brilliant, and he runs a website. He's a terrific writer and speaker and thinker, and he's passionately anti-war. We did a conference in Maryland, and Dennis came to that at the University of Maryland.
Speaking of brilliant people, Noam Chomsky is actually going to be in New York with Wally Shawn. They're going to be having a dialogue at the New York Public Library, and that's exciting. Noam is, I think, 88 or 89, beautiful man, and if we only would listen to this man, he's been making a lot of sense for many years, and the New York Times has even called him arguably the most important intellectual alive. So why doesn't,
Why don't they give him an op-ed column every week?
Yeah. Well, the good thing, though, Alice, is that we have the internet. We have this tool.
Goodness, because I'm really, if I wasn't doing the crossword puzzle, I think I'd get rid of the Times.
Really?
And my father used to bring it home every night, marked up in blue pen, and read aloud to us what was important. I mean, I've been reading it. I'm like totally addicted to the Times. But I am so upset with how they're writing about Putin. And I realized that when, I got politically active. I was a suburban housewife in 1968.
You weren't one of those desperate housewives, though. Okay.
In Massapequa. And I'm watching television when they had news on television.
okay.
And there was a documentary, I think it was Edward R. Murrow, showing Ho Chi Minh going to Woodrow Wilson in 1919 after World War I, begging him to help them get the French out of Vietnam because they treated them so badly. There was this movie, Indochine, about French colonial rule, and it showed they put them in cages. They had rubber plantations instead of cotton, and they chained them and they made them pick. So anyway, we turned him down because France was our ally, and they showed that he modeled his constitution after the U.S. I mean, everybody held us up. So the Soviets were more than happy to help, and that's how he became a communist. And then The same night, the kids at Columbia University rioted. They locked the president in, so they didn't want to be drafted. They didn't want to go to Vietnam. And they were saying, don't trust anyone over 30. I had just turned 30.
Oh, my goodness.
I said to what's wrong with these kids? This is America. Wow. Don't they know we have a political process? So I go down to the Democratic Club, and they're having a debate between the Hawks and the Doves.
Oh,
and
where is this, Alice?
In Massapequa, Long Island.
Okay.
And I joined the Doves, and I wound up running Eugene McCarthy's campaign.
You did?
So we lost.
Wow. Okay.
We lost because the party was fixed. Everything was so. For the next 4 years, we planned the new Democratic coalition. We went door to door. We took over the whole party. I moved to Maryland in the middle because my husband's job. I kept doing it in Maryland. And in 1972, I went to the convention. We nominated George McGovern. And it was the most incredible convention. It was like gays and blacks and women and young people. And the media never wrote one word about his program for civil rights, for peace, for poverty. All they wrote about was Thomas Eagleton had been hospitalized for manic depression 20 years earlier. His vice president.
Terrible.
That was the front page all the time, like O.J. and Monica. And Humphrey won, and then they created the superdelegates, so we could never do that again. So when you say the internet is good, it is. It's like that gives us, finally, because you're not going to get it in the lamestream media.
Nixon won. Nixon beat McGovern, right?
Yeah, McGovern only won Massachusetts. It was like a total smash. It was like what they were doing to Bernie. If there was no internet, Bernie never would have gone this far. The Times didn't cover him until late in the campaign, and the first story they did about him on the front page, you know what the headline said? I remember very clearly.
Tell it.
Is Bernie Sanders comfortable kissing babies?
What?
Like the National Enquirer.
Yeah.
It was like
terrible.
So disrespectful to everything he was saying about social injustice.
You mentioned McGovern, and I like to say and give a good shout out to Warren Beatty, who campaigned for Warren McGovern, great actor, Hollywood liberal, one of the last of the great Hollywood liberals, people like Paul Newman, Robert Redford still going strong, And my dad was in the play where Beatty was discovered for Hollywood. My dad was an actor. My dad actually went from being an actor to an activist. And in his activism, my dad actually helped to save the New Jersey Palisades from being developed in Edgewater, New Jersey. I'm a product of an activist father, going to council meetings, handing out flyers for important meetings, the reporters calling our house, So that was a pivot that he made from acting to activism. In our family, my grandmother, my dad's mother, was brought to America by a famous actress named Blanche Walsh, who was part of the formation of the Hollywood star system. This is on the Irish side. She was the original advocate of an American national theater, this idea of a nationwide chain of theaters where the masses of people can see serious plays at a low cost, and also a component, she called it the National Liberal Theater of America. And she was a woman liberated on the stump for this theater in the 1890s, because she felt that the corporate sector was now diminishing the power of art by turning it into commercial fluff. So she felt that there needed to be a theater, and our show is like an echo of that. We're trying to create with our show a non-corporatized space for humane dialogue, for thoughtful conversation, not punditry, not scoring points for sound bites, but for deep dialogue. And we also featured on our show Joe Franklin, the man who invented the TV talk show. And we gave him his last interview in 2014.
What was the first TV talk show?
In 1950, Joe Franklin had a radio show at that time, and ABC had some free time during the day, and he approached them with an idea of having a talk show where there'd be 2 chairs and a microphone, so it would be very low overhead.
Before Johnny
Carson, before all of them, and Joe had the world's first TV talk show.
I remember that. I was too young, I guess. I remember Howdy Doody and Milton Berle. And my uncle was a vice president in Bankers Trust, and they had RCA as a client, so he got, like in 1947, the first experimental television set. It had like a 6-inch screen, and everybody would be they would call him when there was going to be a program. And when they had the Joe Louis heavyweight fight, there were like hundreds of people in my Aunt Molly's house watching this little.
My dad used to tell me stories about watching Uncle Milty on Tuesday nights. One neighbor had a TV set, and they would all go to their house.
We all went to Mrs. Allison's for Howdy Doody. Till we got television. Yeah.
This is such a wonderful experience just to be here with you, Alice, in Yorkville. And I'm so glad that on the buses that run from east to west, they still say Yorkville on the title. They still say Yorkville. People don't know what Yorkville was. Yorkville was a bastion of the Hungarians and Germans and Eastern Europeans. And my great-grandfather, John Horza, whose nickname was the Sheik after Valentino, and who knew Bela Lugosi, used to hang out in Yorkville. And he'd walk around with his spats and his, Panama hats, and this was really the place. Is there any vestiges left here of the old Hungarian neighborhood? Is there at least one restaurant that we could go to?
I don't think so. I think the last one, the Chardash, closed, But as I said to you earlier before the show, my grandmother came from Hungary. And this is our favorite family story. She had a newsstand. Yes. Well, I should go back a little. My grandfather was a tailor, and he was working with the garment center. And he was trying to organize a union. This is at the turn of the century, and he was blackballed. He was a troublemaker. They didn't want a union, They didn't want to help the working guys. So they opened a newsstand on 79th and 1st. And they lost their license because my grandmother was illegally selling chocolate egg creams in the newsstand. She was only allowed to sell newspapers. So they took her license away, and my grandfather was so upset. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. So she goes down to City Hall with her 4 children, and my mother is the baby, 9 months old. And then there's Miriam and Harold and Ella, 2 and 3 and 4. And she brings the 4 kids into this deputy mayor's office and sticks my 9-month-old mother on his desk and walks out and says, "You're not going to give me my license? You take my children." And she walks down the hall and leaves the 4 kids in the office.
Many years before women's lib, this happened.
The Freedmen women are way ahead of everybody. So anyway, so he came running after her, and they got her license, and then they opened a candy store where they could sell legal chocolate egg creams and malteds. Anyway.
Wonderful. Well, behind us you see a piano, so that shows you there's culture here. I also like to think of dialogue as having a musical aspect to it, the back and forth, the rhythmic nature of human conversation. So we're creating symphonies with our show of dialogue, of stories, of ideas, and this is what we're trying to do. I also looked at your bookshelf, which I always go right to when I meet a new person's house, look at the bookshelf, and I saw John Updike, one of my favorite writers. His famous book, Couples, is on the shelf, which for me was an introduction to literature when I first read that when I was in college at Fordham. I was an English major, and I had a professor who was a Columbia graduate who was a great fan of Updike, and he made me interested in Updike. And the one time when I met Updike, which was in 2000, he had a poetry reading of his poetry collection in Jersey City, and I said, I got to meet my writer hero, So it was the champagne reception, and there he was with his blue eyes, white hair, and I got the courage, and I said, John Updike, I said, you're my hero. I love the way you write. I said, I wish I could write like you. And he looked me in the eye, and he said, you have to learn to write like you. And I said, okay. And that's been a lesson I'm trying to teach also my students, to find your voice. We want people to find your voice, and you have a strong voice, Alice. So maybe you can, we only have 7 minutes left, maybe you could offer our audience some encouragement on how they can, if people feel shy. A lot of people are shy and they don't want to speak out to the world. Were you always so, outgoing, or did you develop this? Is there a way that people can find their voices?
I don't know. I mean, it's just me. I think I'm Aries.
Aries.
I'm fiery. I'm a leader. I mean, you read my astrology, you can see why.
Okay.
And my parents, they were very active. My mother was president of Hadassah 3 terms, and my
What is that?
Hadassah was an American Jewish organization that was saving money to build this hospital in Israel. I mean, we had family that died in the Holocaust. My father's family came from Poland, and my grandfather was married with 2 sons in Warsaw, and his wife died in childbirth, and he married my grandmother, came to America, had my father. He left 2 sons with family. He had my father and his family, and then when he got settled, they had a bakery on 101st and 1st right here in this neighborhood. And when he got settled, he sent for the 2 boys, and my Uncle Max came, but his older brother, Abraham, didn't want to come, and then he was lost. We could not track him down. I mean, Hitler came and the Polish, and so my point, what was my point? I can't remember why I was, how we got active.
Yes.
So they were always active in those kinds of they were very active with America. I wanted to tell you the Hadassah story.
Okay.
My mother went to Israel, and with some friends, and it was like so emotional for her to see it, because they had, they were so, nobody would take the Jews in after World War II. It's the same immigrant story. If you read this Eleanor Roosevelt biography by Blanche Wiesen-Cook, she was begging Franklin to take the Jews. Nobody wanted them,
That's terrible.
And when I think about it, why didn't they give him a piece of Germany?
Exactly. Yeah.
They gave him, the Arab,
Why?
the lowest on the
made
white
no
colonial
sense.
masters. So anyway,
Yes,
but
right.
they could have learned to live together. I
Correct.
just read this fabulous book by Amos Oz, Israeli peace activist. There were other ways they could have approached it than the way they did. But anyway, my mother went with her friends.
Okay.
And they took a taxi, and the cab driver was an Arab, and my mother said they told him, in Israel, we'd like to see Hadassah Hospital. And he said, did you ladies have anything to do with it? My mother said, yes, we work, we save money.
Right.
She used to run a rummage sale and get money for. He says, I have to tell you, this is the best hospital. All my children were born there, and I'm not going to charge you for the ride.
That's fair. A New York cab story.
Right, a Jerusalem cab story.
Right, okay. That's fair.
But it was like Arabs and Jews.
Sure,
It was
sure,
really
sure.
nice. And then I have to tell you about my father, because he was incredible. So they went to a Hadassah luncheon where Eleanor Roosevelt was speaking, and my mother says to my father, so let's just stay here. I just want to see her pass by. He says, honey, I'll introduce you to her, because she was Mrs. Roosevelt.
Yes,
I'd like you to meet my wife. And she goes, how do you do, my dear?
Oh, look at that.
He was terrific. He was like something. He was the musical guy, and he played every instrument, and he never had a lesson. And maybe we could go back to the original, the Red Scare, because when I was a child, we rented a bungalow in the Catskills in Monticello for the summer, because you didn't have air conditioning in New York. We were in the Bronx. And the summer that the war ended, the landlord was Mr. and Mrs. Shribnik, and they were Russian Jews, and they were communists. But the communists were our friends. We were working with Stalin, So anyway, they had a rec room with a piano, and Mr. Shribnik taught my father, who played by ear, every single Russian folk song, work song, all the. So he played them. So then we come back, and in 1947 already there's McCarthyism, and you can't see, the Iron Curtain.
Right.
So my mother said they went to some meeting of the American Jewish Committee, and they were playing Mr. Shribnik's songs, and she says, Saul, we got to get out of here. These people are communists. So they left, and she's so proud of this. Then I'm at Queens College in 1953. And I'm having some discussion with somebody, and she said, here, you should read this. And she gives me this yellow pamphlet, and it says Communist Party of America. And I go home, my heart is pounding. I put in my book bag, I go home, I go up to the 8th floor, I walk directly to the incinerator without even looking. That was how terrified we were. And
Yeah.
fast forward, when I finally went to the Soviet Union with the Lawyers Committee for Nuclear Disarmament, and we met, first of all, every guy over 60 was wearing his World War II medals on his chest. Every street had a monument to the dead, and the Leningrad cemetery had mass graves. You know, they had the siege of Leningrad, where like 1 million people were starving to death when the Nazis locked them in. So my guide says to me, "Why don't you Americans trust us?" I said, "Why don't we trust you? What about Hungary? What about Czechoslovakia? Why should we trust you?" And he looks at me like he has tears in his eyes, like so sincere. He says, "But we had to protect our borders from Germany."
Of course.
And I looked at the guy, and he was telling me his truth.
Right.
And we were getting so much baloney from our government. It's just like when Wilson went there after World War One, and now what they're doing, making Putin the one that's stealing the election, when they've been trying all along to negotiate treaties with us to get rid of the bomb, to keep space for peace. They've been aggressively asking us, and we've been rejecting them. And this is where we are. It's the corporatocracy. They don't want to think about. You know, the communist system doesn't allow capital to rule. I think we need something new. Like, we should still have entrepreneurs that can make money and do business, but we should not have corporations. The first corporation was the Dutch West India Company 500 years ago. It had limited liability.
Right.
Nobody could be sued, only the corporation. So they could go and rape and pillage and plunder, and nobody was responsible. And that's what we have now. Your corporations, they can pollute the land and the environment and poison people. The president doesn't go to jail. It's just the corporation pays a fine.
Wow. Future historians will look at this show and they'll say this was the beginning of the end of corporations, ladies and gentlemen. We need a humanity. Claudia, how much time? We have 1 minute left. We're so grateful to have you with us. Alice, making trouble on the Upper East Side. Okay, we hope that Mr. Donald J. Trump watches this and learns something and rises to the occasion. We hope that maybe a new political party will emerge, a new consciousness rising. Pink hats hit the streets, women rising, finding our voices with Alice Slater here, full of stories, full of tradition, full of spunk, and feisty as all heck, and taking on the powers that be. With Alice, we love you, Alice, and we want this to be ongoing, and we'd love to come back and have more conversations and maybe a salon with other people here. You could recommend people. How does that sound?
Sounds lovely.
Keep up the wonderful work, Alice. We love you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.